Iraq economic news and points to ponder Wednesday evening, July 17, 24. Listen to the full version on the official dinarreport.com website and become our supporter on Patreon. Through the dollar and the yuan, the U.S. Treasury continues to impose its guardianship over the Iraqi economy. July 16 information report. The Parliamentary Finance Committee indicated earlier that it would demand that the central bank address the issue of the exchange rate and the flow of foreign trade through the use of the currency basket diversification system, so that there would be more options for the central bank and Iraqi merchants. The currency basket system is a monetary system used by the central banks of countries to determine the exchange rate of their local currencies. The system is based on a group of currencies chosen by the central bank of each country, and the basket consists of a group of the most powerful banknotes affecting the global economy. While economic experts warned of the effects of this decision on the local market and its cause of an increase in the exchange rate of the US dollar and an increase in exchange rates. In an unsuccessful step, as experts in economic affairs describe it, the Central Bank of Iraq stopped dealing in the Chinese yuan after the US Federal Reserve accused Iraq of inflating remittances. Inflation, which has negative repercussions on the economic situation of the Iraqi family, presented three solutions to the Central Bank of Iraq to continue the flow of remittances to China. Through the dollar and the yuan, the U.S. Treasury continues to impose its guardianship over the Iraqi economy. Clip_image 004 is making an officially unannounced visit to the United States of America to discuss with officials in Washington regarding the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to stop dealing in Baghdad in Chinese yuan. The Central Bank of Iraq had previously strengthened its assets denominated in the yuan through the Singapore Development Bank to finance Iraqi trade and imports with China by about $12 billion annually. In the latest Iraqi government move to stop dealing in the Chinese yuan, informed sources revealed to Shafaq news agency yesterday, Saturday, that the governor of the Central Bank of Iraq, Ali al-Alak. But the U.S. Federal Reserve's policy is still putting the stick in the wheel of liberating the Iraqi dinar and achieving gains at the expense of the dollar exchange rate. Therefore, when the U.S. Federal Reserve saw that the Chinese yuan was being used in foreign transfers, it quickly issued a decision to stop transfers under the pretext that there were suspicions in some transfers in the Chinese yuan. A member of the Parliamentary Finance Committee, Representative Moeen al-Kadhimi, described the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to stop remittances in the Chinese yuan as arbitrary against the Iraqi economy. Al-Kadhimi said in a statement to the Al-Maloma agency, the decision to stop transfers in the Chinese yuan was issued by the U.S. Federal Bank due to its claim that there were suspicions about some transfers in the Chinese yuan. He pointed out that the Central Bank of Iraq has contracted with an international company to evaluate and monitor remittances, and this company is a supplier of acceptance and trust for the U.S. Federal Reserve. He pointed out that, after a short period, the Central Bank of Iraq will resume transferring remittances in Chinese yuan to Iraqi merchants and in general, noting that these U.S. Federal Reserve measures are considered arbitrary against Iraq and its national economy. For his part, commenting on this decision, the economic expert, Zia al-Mohsen, confirmed that stopping dealing in the Chinese yuan by the Central Bank of Iraq is an unsuccessful step if we take into account that trade dealing with China exceeds $65 billion. Through the dollar and the yuan, the U.S. Treasury continues to impose its guardianship over the Iraqi economy. Clip_image 006. Al-Mohsen said in a statement to the Maluma agency, which will increase inflation rates, which will have negative effects on the economic situation of the Iraqi family. This decision will have a negative impact on the local market, and the demand for the dollar will increase, which means an increase in the exchange rate of the US dollar in the local market. The Central Bank of Iraq stopped trading in the Chinese yuan after the US Federal Reserve accused Iraq of inflating remittances. During the current period, America has worked to destroy the Iraqi currency by imposing sanctions on private banks and banning the dollar under many pretexts, which in one way or another led to a severe financial crisis in the local markets. Iraq also began opening bank accounts in the Indian rupee for a number of Iraqi banks. A former deputy reveals the hidden. These are the U.S. Federal Reserve's restrictions. It is noteworthy that the Central Bank of Iraq also moved to strengthen its assets in the UAE dirham and negotiated an increase in its assets denominated in euros to finance trade with the European Union. Information, private. On Wednesday, former member of the Parliamentary Finance Committee, Abdul Hadi al-Sadawi, the U.S. Federal Reserve imposes restrictions on the Central Bank of Iraq, which is a reaction to the demand to remove American forces from the country. He added, revealed the U.S. Federal Reserve's restrictions on the Iraqi central bank. Al-Sadawi said in an interview with Al-Maluma, America is adopting an approach with specific paths in Iraq, which is to give more leeway to the work of foreign banks at the expense of Iraqi banks. It is noteworthy that the dollar exchange rates in the Iraqi markets witnessed a state of instability in the past days in terms of rising and then falling again. He pointed out the necessity of reviewing the activities of foreign banks in the country and seeking to address corruption in local banks and uncovering fake banking windows that engage in money laundering. Our financial and banking system and the global economy. Economical July 16, 2024. Samir al-Nusairi. Most of the countries of the world have been suffering from successive economic crises since 2020 until the present. They are the harshest and most harmful to the country's economies than the previous crises that swept the world previously, which began with the lockdown crisis as a result of the corona pandemic, and the stagflation crisis due to food shortages, high prices, the Russian-Ukrainian war, and economic conflicts between America and China, most recently the Zionist war on Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories, expectations of a new aggression against Lebanon, the struggle to control oil prices, and the attempts of the affected countries to find plans and deals to control this rise that has occurred over the past years. From our follow-up, monitoring and analysis of the movement of the global economy, we noticed that most countries in the world have increased inflation rates and exceeded one rank. And economic growth rates have decreased, especially regional countries, and most countries with major economies and even emerging countries have tried to form new axes, poles and economic blocks and conclude agreements between themselves and other countries for transactions, trade and finance outside the group of 7 major countries, such as the BRICS bloc. The central banks in most countries have taken difficult decisions in order to control the prices of their local currencies from falling and maintain their foreign currency reserves at safe rates, thus reducing stagflation and maintaining relatively stable prices and economic growth balanced with economic conditions currently prevailing by raising interest rates at a rate that is commensurate with its economic situation. Therefore, as far as the matter is concerned with Iraq's economic situation, although the reports of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to evaluate the Iraqi economy for the current year indicate that the inflation rate did not exceed 3%, and according to what Iraq still maintains a good foreign exchange reserve to cover its imports and cover its local currency in circulation. However, it is a one-sided economy and depends on oil revenues, and Central Bank announced it is better than the inflation rates in the regional and neighboring countries, and that the growth rate in output, the gross domestic product, for this year is expected to be 6%. Its financial and banking sector is weak and suffers from sanctions and restrictions on the use of the US dollar in foreign banking transactions, and still, its credit rating is within limits that are internationally classified as unstable, and in the absence of new policy measures, the public finance deficit is expected to reach 7.6% in 2024 and expand further after that with the expected decline in oil prices in the medium term. As a result, public debt will almost double from 44% in 2023 to 86% by 2029. The sector, also the real sector, suffers from many problems that prevent it from achieving the necessary revenues to reduce the share of oil revenues in public budgets. This means that the deficit in the balance of payments and the deficit in the trade balance are prevalent despite the fact that the government, finance and central bank are making great efforts to rebuild a solid banking sector, because without the existence of a sector with developed banking, it is not possible to build a sound national economy. The inherited and complex problem is the weak compliance of the Iraqi financial and banking sector with international standards, and the foreign trade policy is unclear despite the measures taken by the central bank to regulate trade financing and the accreditation of some reputable foreign registered banks, but the Presence of informal border crossings and intra-trade is not legitimate. Speculators in the foreign exchange trading market have led to fluctuations in exchange rates from time to time. For the purpose of the central bank exercising its role in reducing inflation, controlling the general level of prices, maintaining the dinar exchange rate within its target limits, controlling the interest rate, and maintaining its foreign cash reserves within the required rates, as well as controlling the money supply, and certainly, all of these aspects are within the goals and interests of the central bank, its board of directors during the next stage, and for the purpose of avoiding the harm that currently threatens the global economy. This requires taking bold steps, as follows. First, reconsider the structure and presentation of the general budget and determine the contribution percentages of the agricultural, industrial, tourism sectors and non-oil revenues at no less than 30% during the coming years until 2030. The total expenditures must not exceed the total revenues in any case, and the deficit must be zero. Second, adopting agricultural, industrial and commercial policies that are consistent with the trend to support the private sector, and stimulate and encourage it to contribute to sustainable development projects and move to market leadership in 2030. Third, recreating a new strategy for the central bank for the years 27-2030 in the field of monetary policy applications, enhancing financial inclusion, controlling exchange rate stability, enhancing compliance with international standards, comprehensive application of digital transformation in the banking sector, and transforming Iraqi government banks into mixed joint stock companies. It is managed in accordance with modern banking techniques, lifting sanctions on private banks, developing their work in accordance with international standards, in accordance with government procedures in this regard, relevant and internationally classified, not allowing the weak ones to remain working within the banking market, and adopting the principle of competing for whichever is better and serving sustainable development. Listen to the full version on the official dinarreport.com website and become our supporter on Patreon. Source: Dinar Recaps.